to jump right into the topic that I was asked to speak about is about the Tasawwuf of Murabat al-Hajj. And I want to really look at a couple of things so that we get the context of not only Murabat al-Hajj and his application of Tasawwuf and his understanding of Tasawwuf and his teaching of Tasawwuf, but then also my interaction with that. Because whenever we narrate things, this is, you know, part of oral history. It's my observations, what I've heard. You have to take into context the person who's narrating it to you. So I feel it's important that even before going into who he is and my understanding of him, that you also understand a little bit about me, and then also a little bit about what Tasawwuf is, because that's the question. What is Tasawwuf? So before I went to Mauritania, or let me just start off with this. If we look in the books of Tasawwuf, and say, what is the definition? What is a Sufi? If you ask the average Muslim right now, what is Tasawwuf? What is a Sufi? You're going to get so many different explanations of what this is. And according to Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, there's actually 2,000 definitions that have been mentioned in the books about what Tasawwuf is. And he said, Hasilatul Kalam, in conclusion, when we look at all of these varying definitions, he said it's a very experiential. There are some definite there's a definition of what it exactly is, but the application of Tasawwuf differs based on the individual person. So each person, as they experience Tasawwuf, some might have said, oh, it's giving up the dunya. That's because for them, that was their application of Tasawwuf. For others, they said, oh, it's a focus on Quran, because that was there. It's the application of the hadith and following the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so everybody would give a definition on what they felt Tasawwuf, the essence of Tasawwuf was. But what this also shows us is that there is a certain element of experience that is occurring in the science of Tasawwuf, while we do have some hard principles that guide it. But I think this is what, because it's not as hard a science as, say, fiqh. You know, if you go to somebody and you say, what is fiqh? And how do we achieve fiqh? And what are the madahib of fiqh? It's a hard science in the sense that this is everything about the science. It's clear from the time of the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, the four Imams on down to us. We can pull out the books, we can have the discussions. It's very clear cut. It's more objective. The application of Tasawwuf is subjective in a certain sense, and there are some guiding principles, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I think this is what, by not being as hard a science as the other sciences such as fiqh, or aqidah, or theology, it's allowed people and cultures and individuals and personalities to define Tasawwuf for themselves. What is Tasawwuf? And then it leaves the individual, the general person, the average person, who has not studied Tasawwuf or studied the ulum to understand, to be able to differentiate what is from the deen, what is from culture, what is from the nufus, from the self of people, just individual personalities. And so now we're lost with what is Tasawwuf. So let's look at what the Sufis have said as what is the goal of Tasawwuf? What is the end result goal? There's two primary goals of the science of Tasawwuf. One is the perfection of outward akhlaq. So if we look at the hadith, let's back up a little bit. There's a hadith, the hadith of Jibreel, which is one of the most foundational hadiths that guide what our understanding of the subjects or the categories of the deen are. And if you're not familiar with the hadith of Jibreel, I highly encourage you to read it. Just type in hadith of Jibreel, and it's the hadith where Jibreel alayhi salam came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the form of a man and asked him questions about the deen. And he asked him about Iman, about faith, about Islam, about Ihsan, and about the signs of the end of time. Well, the question about Ihsan, or perfection. So he asked about theology, Iman. He asked about legal, the application, the practice, Islam. And then he asked about Ihsan. And each one of these have been categories. He also asked about Akhir al-Zaman, the end of times. And that has its own collection of ahadith and discussions and so forth. But he asked about Ihsan. What is perfection of your worship? And so when we approach Tasawwuf, we should look at it synonymously with the word ihsan. Ihsan, tazkiyah, Tasawwuf. There's, going back to those 2,000 names. as Shakespeare, and I know this is a program from the UK. So, by the way, as a side note, when I was growing up, my father, Allah yarhamu, may Allah have mercy on him, used to say, well, you know, Rami, Shakespeare was an Arab. So the one of the most, excuse me, the greatest speakers and writers of the English language actually was Arab. He was Shaykh Zubair. And I remember telling this to a teacher that I had in college, and he had an introduction to Arabic class that I had signed up for. And I mentioned this to him. He said, actually, no, he was from India. He was Shaykh Pir. And then later on, my dad said he actually increased it. He said, no, Rami, he's Arab. And not only is he Arab, he's actually from our family. He's from the Nsour family, the Nsour family being from Jordan. So if you type in, because my father would do this sometimes, he would type in our name in different spellings to try to find relatives. So one time he wrote E-N-S-O-R, and Shakespeare's name popped up. That was his family name. So he's Shaykh Zubair Nsour. That's a joke, of course, but Shaykh Zubair, said a rose by any other name is still a rose. So keep that in mind, that tasawwuf by any other name is still tasawwuf, whether we call it tazkiyah or akhlaq or tahdhib al-akhlaq, perfection of character. The Prophet ﷺ said, I was sent, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was sent to perfect behavior. So there's this element of perfection and refining of the outward behavior, but that's not all tasawwuf is. In fact, some of the Sufi, the later, such as Ibn Ajiba, said this is actually the outward tasawwuf, because it's accessible in the form, okay, we can look at this ayah, we can look at this hadith, we can apply it, we can say what are the rules, what are the fara'id, what are the sunan. You know, it's very objective in that sense. So it's the tasawwuf of the zahir, of the outward. He said, but there's another element to tasawwuf, which is connection to the ghaib, connection to the unseen. And so if we look at tasawwuf, the approaching tasawwuf in these two ways, it helps us kind of figure out what people are talking about. Because are you talking about the refinement of character, or are you talking about the connection to the ghaib? And some people think that tasawwuf is all this or all this. And unfortunately, most people think that tasawwuf is all, the purpose of tasawwuf is connection to the unseen. And so you get some problems in that. If you go to a person who say they don't pray, or like up here in Northern California, there was a group. Actually, we have two groups, one in Walnut, California, one in Napa, California, and you have so-called Sufis who are not even Muslim. And if you go to them and you say, well, what are you trying to do? Oh, I'm trying to perfect my character, and I'm also trying to make this connection to the unseen. Well, you have to, you know, what about Islam and Shahada? No, it's all about my heart, and it's all about my connection to the unseen. And then they go down this rabbit hole and that's also a word, I believe, am I correct? Alice in Wonderland. Let me just check. Is that a UK author? Alice in Wonderland. I have to check really quick. And if somebody reminds me, I will actually mention Lewis Carroll. UK, yes. Lewis Carroll's UK. Okay, so down the rabbit hole. Please, somebody, if we have some time at the end, I wanted to mention something about the difference between American and UK literature. I don't think we'll have time, but just remind me. So sometimes they go down the rabbit hole of this connection to the ghaib, and they forget the outward, which is you got to be Muslim. What about salah? What about the deen? What about aqidah? What about theology? So we have to have both, and both of them require the deen, because we cannot have perfection of character unless you have the shahadatain. There's one person, and unfortunately, this came from him. This statement came from him, and I was very shocked when I heard it. I won't mention his name, but he said, no, tasawwuf is not perfection of character. If you want that, you can go to the Buddhists, because the Buddhists can teach you how to perfect your character. And I said, no, that's not right for the person to say, because even in the perfection of the character, you have to weigh by the balance, by the scales of Sharia. So we have the outward akhlaq, we have the connection to ghaib. If you look in the early books, there's many things that are listed of how we achieve this. They talk about ilm, about knowledge, dhikr, remembrance of Allah, travel like a rihla, to seek out people, to seek out experiences, friends, the suhbah, the sheikh. They mentioned the sheikh. The sheikh is mentioned. But the wird, taking on a regular practice of a devotional practice, whether it's a wird of dhikr, a wird of salah, a wird of sadaqah, a wird of ziyarah, of visitation. They talk about ziyarah, visiting the righteous people, both the dead and alive, and the importance of that. They talk about sadaqah, they talk about jihad and nafs, and so on and so forth. They mention, in fact, in one of the books by Imam Suhrawardi, it's a whole paragraph of all of the different tools to reach that, and embedded in that is sheikh as one of, not the only way. And so sometimes people, they hear tasawwuf and they think tariqah, sheikh, bay'ah, that's the only way. That is a method of the application of the science of tasawwuf and the art of tasawwuf, so to speak, but it's not the only one. And again, to bring up Sheikh Zubair, Shakespeare, as I was typing out these notes, I typed out tariqah, and I was going to say tariqah or no tariqah, and then I said, let me just make a twist. Tariqah or not tariqah? That is the question. And that's the question I think we want to ask here, because most people, they'll say, okay, we accept tasawwuf, but it has to be through tariqah. Or some people will say, no, we can't have any tariqah at all, especially this will come, they say, we don't even want to use the word tasawwuf because of all of the negative connotations. So you have a lot of people, say, coming from the Salafi camp or the Wahhabi camp, they will say, well, we can have tazkiyah, that's a part of our deen, but we're not going to use the word tasawwuf, and we're not going to use the word tariqah. Even though if they look in their books, if they look in the fatwa of Ibn Taymiyyah, the thickest volume is Kitab al-Suluk, the chapter of the path, traveling the path of spirituality. And there are many people who make the argument that Ibn Taymiyyah himself actually bore the khirqa. He took on the cloth of the Qadiri tariqah. Now, I know a lot of the Salafis will refute that and say it never happened, but the end result, Ibn Taymiyyah did not refute tasawwuf. In fact, in his book, he talks about the ghurur of some of the Sufiya, and he makes a distinction between the ghulat of the Sufiya, the Sufis who went astray, and the Sufiya who are on the path. So even if we say, okay, let's leave the argument that Ibn Taymiyyah had a tariqah, he himself did not reject tasawwuf or the word tasawwuf or even the Sufis. And this is in Kitab al-Fatawa in the Bab al-Suluk. What we do here at Taiba Foundation, because there's a lot of spread of the Salafi da'wah within the prison system, and some of our students are from a Salafi background, and we accept students from all backgrounds. We're just teaching the deen. We have people who are not Muslim, we have some who are Shia. The overwhelming majority are Sunnis, but we do have others, and we don't reject people because of their faith. So one of the things that we do when we come to the section of tasawwuf, we actually present a criticism of tasawwuf by Imam alGhazali, where he criticizes the Sufis, and we present the Ibn Taymiyyah's presentation of who are the rightly guided Sufis. So kind of it throws people for a spin. They usually associate Ghazali with Sufis, Ibn Taymiyyah is anti-Sufi, but now we present Ghazali refuting some of the Sufis, those who went astray, and Ibn Taymiyyah supporting the Sufis who are on the Sunnah. Okay, so tariqah or not tariqah? That is the question. The four Imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, did they have a tariqah? As far as what's recorded, they don't. Some of the people who present tasawwuf as only being tariqah based will say no, they actually had companionship with tasawwuf and so forth. But we know well in usul that الدليل إذا طرقه الاحتمال سقط الاستدلال, that when you bring a proof that you say, possibly, maybe it could have, we can't use that as a proof. We have to have a clear proof. Otherwise, you can't use an assumption or reading into the dalil as a proof. So that's your reading into it. But let's go further. Imam al-Ghazali, did he have a tariqah? If he did, he didn't talk about it. So now you have one of the foremost authorities of tasawwuf, Imam al-Ghazali, who does not have tariqah, who's not calling to tariqah, who's not saying tasawwuf is with tariqah. And his book is one of the main books that many people who teach tasawwuf through tariqahs will use his book. So that's the question that we should ask ourselves. Again, tariqah or not tariqah, is tasawwuf achievable without tariqah? I want to take a break.